Helen Marie, your host of the I Don't Think We Talk Enough About podcast. And today I'm so excited to welcome Julie Menanno. Julie is a licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed clinical professional counsellor and relationship coach. She currently has a clinical therapy practice treating couples in Montana, as well as a relationship coaching practice with a staff of coaches who serve clients all over the globe. Enjoy. Julie, welcome to my podcast.
It's so great to be here.
Oh, it's so beautiful to finally see you. But I wanted to open with actually your opening words, very reminiscent of your Instagram posts. But in the introduction, you say, I see you, I hear you, I'm safe, I'm on your team, I see you, I hear you. Oh my goodness, I went cold when I read that, like a visceral reaction in a beautiful way of what love, what epitome of healthy, secure love. It was beautiful, Julie.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Beautiful. And it leads me on to ask you, it sounds like a big question, but what does secure love look like?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are a lot of ways to define it. I keep trying to play around with the most concise way, but I think it's just a felt sense of ease with another person most of the time, the vast majority of the time. You kind of, let's say with your romantic partner, right? Because I'm talking about romantic relationships, but you just have a confidence that you can reach them when you need to reach them, that they'll show up for you when you really need them, that you feel appreciated, that that either you're being emotionally validated in a moment or you feel confident that will happen when you need it. And, the opposite of that is kind of, feeling a sense of dis-ease, like you never quite know if your partner's going to be there for you. In interactions, you always sort of felt kind of misunderstood or like you have to hold back on what you're saying. And so again, to flip back to secure, it's just interactions leave you feeling understood, like I said in that quote, seen, held, validated. I always say, okay, a secure attachment would be kind of like living in San Diego. I don't know how much you know about San Diego, but in the US, San Diego has, it's Southern California has this, it's very south, has this beautiful climate where it's never exceptionally hot or exceptionally cold. And it's just, a lot of people want to go live there because it's very mild. But there are times when some really bad weather comes to San Diego. I mean, you'll get, storms and monsoons and all kinds of stuff. But overall, nobody says, oh, it's so rainy in San Diego, even though San Diego gets its share of rain now and then. So and then what do people do? Well, they deal with the rain, right? They do what they need to do. And then they all kind of restructure themselves back into their normal climate. They know how to survive it. It's not going to tear them apart, and nobody's moving out of San Diego because it, rained for a couple of days. So
I think that's a really useful analogy of the general feeling of the relationship is good and positive.
Yes.
And how we manage the upset or any slight issues that come in. I think that's brilliant. You talk through the book a lot about attachment styles from childhood. And I think it's really important to bring in here that the importance that those attachment styles have when they play out in our adult relationships and the attachment wounds we can have from childhood. And you mentioned in the book, I think the stat was only 50% of us come from a secure attachment base from childhood. So that leaves...
That's the statistic,
I think that's relevant in the UK as well. I know that's the US, relevant in the UK. That's a huge amount of people left out there that
don't have
a secure attachment groundings from childhood. And I wonder if you just want, in a nutshell, I know it's not easy to do that, but just something around what the attachment styles are, Julie.
Sure. Well, first, let me say this, that 50% that's insecure, it can happen to varying degrees. There really are people that have, elements and parts of their relationship where they struggle and they have some insecure issues, insecure attachment issues. But overall, they're like, it's good enough for us, we're still trying to grow. So, and then you have couples on the other end of that spectrum that are just like entirely distressed. So I always like to say, we all have the grandparents in our family or the older aunt or uncle who, clearly grandma's the one doing all the talking and grandpa doesn't really open up, right? But they've been married for 85 years and they're lovely. Okay. So
Yes.
so it's not all bad or all or nothing in that 50%, but there's always room to grow. So the anxious attachment, they are kind of always sort of aware. They have a strong bodily sense of anything not being right in the relationship.
Okay.
They if they get any signal that something isn't going well, they start to feel panicky. They grew up in environments where they really couldn't be sure if their emotional needs were going to be met or not. Maybe got shamed for having big emotions, ignored for having big emotions, kind of a mixed bag of responsiveness. Maybe sometimes they did get responded to. Now in adulthood, their body carries those implicit memories of emotional abandonment and maybe even physical abandonment. And so they're always sort of on alert for it because if I can be alert and I can catch it when it happens, I can protest to my partner and I can get them to change so they're not triggering this place in me anymore. Right. So their way of getting back on track when they feel distressed is to close the distance, reach frantically, protest, go into blame, hyper focus on what their partner is getting wrong. And, there's a lot of truth to the fact that partners do get things wrong. But what happens is they really self abandon. They're really not tapping in, figuring out what's going on for them, and kind of being able to communicate from that place in a clearer, more regulated way. And, let's say they're angry, that anger comes out reactively instead of assertively.
How important, you talk about this in the book, and I love the way you described it, but I want to put the question out there. How important is it for us to understand the attachment style of our partner?
I think that it is extremely important to understand insecure attachment. I do believe that it's very, very, very useful to understand, if your partner has an avoidant attachment, or if your partner has an anxious attachment, this is where they're coming from. This is why it makes sense. But there are these people who aren't going to really, it shows up murky or there's overlap. They don't fit perfectly into those categories. And then what I'm finding is people start to get really confused and then they start to kind of fixate on understanding the exact style. And what I try to tell people in that situation is just look, if you have an insecure attachment, look at all of the ways it can show up, whether it shows up in an anxious way or if it shows up in an avoidant way. Look at all the different childhoods, things that can kind of go wrong that can create an insecure attachment and just work with what is.
And as you were talking there, I thought it's actually more about if we can just try to understand our partner,
Yes.
try
Yes.
and see it from their perspective or their lived experience of why this might hurt in the moment or why they
Yes.
get defensive. So to kind of free ourselves of the label of avoidant but I
Yes.
do have a lovely story actually and I do have permission to use this. It's from a
Okay.
client. And it really made me resonate with a part of your book about when we understand the other, a situation can change hugely about how we feel about them in relationship. And my
Hmm.
client arrived and she does have an anxious attachment, did have a very anxious attachment, and was ready to leave her partner because
Hmm.
her partner would not communicate with her.
Hmm.
And we did a little bit of trying to look behind the partner, what was behind,
Wow.
what was causing them to not talk about themselves, not talk about their needs. And when she revealed his upbringing
Hmm.
and he'd lost his mother very young,
Hmm.
brought up by his grandmother and an only child, there was an emotionally unavailable father.
Hmm.
He was very avoidant. He didn't if we, I mean, drop the label, he didn't really know how to communicate his needs.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And when we talked about this, she just literally said, I need to call him.
Oh,
I don't want to break up with him anymore. The
oh, that's
shame
so
in
touching.
that, but that we see that, don't
Yeah.
we, in couples therapy? If
Oh
we
my gosh. Yes. Yeah.
have the capacity to see the other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I wrote the book with a lot of self-help strategies, words you can say, new ways to communicate. And I'm really trying to put that philosophical idea out of really understanding and let's have this change be born of empathy and understanding. And
I wanted to talk about the importance of understanding our needs and
Mhm,
communicating our needs in a relationship, particularly in ruptures. And I loved your example of Jen and Andrew in the book.
mhm,
And I love the way you bring in those examples because it really gives us sort of lived material to look at,
sure.
case studies. And you talked about them having a discussion about a set of keys. And then it
Mhm,
escalated into an argument that had nothing to do with the keys
sure.
because there was so much bubbling underneath
Mhm,
the surface around resentment, anger,
mhm.
unmet needs. That plays such a part in relationships, doesn't it? That very
Everything.
often the
Yeah.
argument is not about the thing that's been brought to the room.
Right. Most of the time it isn't. And yes, problems are real. I mean, we really do need to decide, where the kids are going to go to school, or we really do need to figure out a budget for finances. But what happens is when couples don't know how to communicate in a way that's emotionally safe and keeps those attachment needs intact. My needs matter to you. You feel appreciated by me. You feel emotionally validated. Then they can't even get to the actual finance conversation because they're too busy fighting for their emotional needs to be met. And so, what I have found is that when we can get couples connected and bonded and be able to maintain that through conversations where they might not see eye to eye, like who's going to put the keys away or why didn't you put the keys away, that stuff just, it really a lot of times just starts to sort of take care of itself. Or they can, come together in a safe place and compromise or figure something out, so yeah.
Mm.
Are there situations where at the end of the day they're so far apart that it can't work? Sure, that happens. I mean, there are certain times where there's just core incompatibility, but we have no idea if that's the case if we first don't clean up this communication and get them being safe with each other.
You brought in a great tip for repair work,
Hmm.
um, and you called it evict.
Hmm.
Do you want to just? I think the listeners will love that because that's got something that they can really hold on to.
Sure. Yeah. If I think of it as like evicting shame, I think of shame as kind of driving all of this. So when people are communicating in a way that isn't healthy, they're really doing a lot of shame work with each other, negative shame work,
Yeah.
And so if we can start communicating with each other in ways that are dissolving shame and relieving shame. And instead of sending messages, there's something wrong with you, you're unlovable, you're not worthy, we're now using our communication to send messages of you're valuable to me, you're lovable, your needs matter, you're worthy. And curiosity is part of that. I'm trying to remember all the the
Do
letters,
you want me
but
to let me do it because I've got it.
sure.
I've got it turned over. Just
I
so
know
you
curiosity.
empathy, validation, which we've done. Vulnerability.
Oh,
It's a
vulnerability.
double V.
Absolutely. I'll give you an example. I need to sleep really cold. Like I need my, I would be happy if my air conditioner was on like 67, to sleep at night. But the rest of my family doesn't really want the house being at 67, when they're going about their evenings. I typically go to bed earlier than others. And so, anyway, so my husband comes in 2 nights ago, and it was I live in Montana, which is a cold part of the US. And so it wasn't super hot outside. So he comes in and opens the balcony door in our bedroom because he's cold downstairs. And something happened in me that I felt really triggered. I felt like, he's turning the air off. Like the scared old part of me, this shadow part of me started to say, he doesn't care about my needs. He doesn't care about me, sleeping well and all these things. And of course, that wasn't true, but instead of, because I have this work and this self-awareness, and I can, I can go to that place of vulnerability. And instead of saying, you don't even care about me, or turn that back on, or whatever, any kind of like protesty
Yeah.
response, or just not saying anything and holding resentment,
Yeah.
I was able to kind of check in and then say to him, there's this part of me gets really scared in those moments that like my needs don't matter to you. That's what happens for me. And just, why did I put words to it? No other reason than just being vulnerable with each other, connecting.
But do you think that that evict shame part is a really important step in how you move towards a secure relationship? Because what we're trying to do,
Mhm.
isn't it, here, is show people that they don't have to stay stuck in insecure relationships.
Absolutely. Yep.
So that evict shame is a huge stepping stone, isn't it, of moving
Mhm.
forward to secure.
Huge. Yeah.
What other things
Well,
would you
and
say?
think about it like this too. That is exactly what we're doing with our clients is we're communicating with evict shame. I mean, we're validating them, we're having empathy for them, we're being curious with them, we're, encouraging their vulnerability. Maybe sometimes we go into our own vulnerability. And why does this stuff need to be stuck between therapist and client? Why are we not giving the same skills to couples or friends or whatever. But I forgot your question.
No, no,
Sorry.
no. I was talking about that. How do we move from insecure to secure?
Hmm.
And actually, when you're looking, I'm sort of answering the question myself, and I don't mean to do that, but as I'm thinking
Oh,
out
that's
loud, is when you're using the evict shame model,
hmm.
if things are really difficult for you within that evict shame model,
Hmm.
that's where you're highlighting your own self-work, isn't it? And that's something to get really
Absolutely.
curious about.
Yes.
So
Yes.
sometimes you need to step away from the couple relationship and look at what you need to be working on too.
Absolutely. And that's really what I'm doing with all the couples I treat is I'm looking for their own, not just the emotional blocks between the two of them, which would be, getting around that block would be adding in more of this evict shame type of dialogue. But what is the block in you?
And I wanted to ask you some questions from my Instagram community.
Sure.
I don't think I've ever had so many questions come in when I've put something out about a podcast. And actually, this came up quite a lot, which is sad, but how do couples overcome trust issues after infidelity? And I know that's a big
Yeah.
question, but what comes to mind for you when you hear someone ask that?
That is probably the most common question I get
Okay.
also. Maybe not the most common, but definitely top five. It is possible to heal from past wounds. We need two things to happen. We need one, behavior change. We can't have that behavior being ongoing. Obviously, that doesn't do anything to build trust. But assuming that the person is no longer having the affair, it requires a series of healing conversations. And those conversations have to have certain elements to them. I have an Instagram post called What Are Attachment Wounds and How to Heal, which really outlines the process as much as I can, in our 10 slides that we get. I have a chapter in the book about healing, and they're conversations where we're creating the healing environment. Are there guarantees? Absolutely not. Sometimes people wound each other to the degree that is just not going to be possible for them to trust again. But what I have found is if someone really wants to, they can get there. If a couple really wants to, they can get to that point. And so we need these conversations to happen in a certain way, meaning the wounded partner is communicating in a certain way and the wounding partner is responding and also communicating in a certain way. And then we need to understand that this is going to need repeated healthy conversations. We need to know when the wound flares that, hey, I can reach to you and I'm going to get support around these
Yeah.
bad feelings I have around this event. And you're not going to tell me, well, we've already talked about it.
Yes.
And what happens is when they start having healthy conversations and they go in the right way, they need to have them less over time.
Julie, thank you. I have
Oh,
just
you're
loved
so
this
welcome, Helen.
conversation. And I have just one more final question that I ask
Sure.
all my guests, which is, what does it mean to you to choose you?
I think what it means for me is being extraordinarily aware of my limitations. You know, I've lived my life up to really very recently having this sort of idea that if I just try hard enough, I can check all the boxes. You know, if I just try hard enough, I can do it all. And I've really had to step back from that in the last few months and realize, wow, like I really can't do everything. I gotta, and so what it's helped me do is really clarify what I really truly care about and focus in on what I really truly care about. And for me, that's helped me just release a lot of pressure on myself and stress and has really taken, helped me eliminate some things in my life that were kind of semi-important, but getting in the way of the things that were really truly important. And
Yeah.
so it's required me to be really gentle on myself, really accepting of limitations, and but it's been very freeing for sure. Yeah,
Love.
definitely.
Okay, well, I'll let you go, but thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, and tell Gia thank you.
I will do. Take care. Take care.
Okay, you too. Bye
Bye.
bye.